My dad found a trapdoor beneath a damp patch of carpet. "The realtor certainly never mentioned this," he said. A putrid scent filled the lounge. It hadn't been there when we viewed the property, but it certainly made itself known once Dad purchased the place. Isn't that always the way? I lack the vocabulary to accurately describe it. It smelt wretched, and that's generous. It was the smell of sewage left to stew at the foot of a festival portaloo, but even Glastonbury's toilets would have been preferable to this. It was more than a smell. Dense, clammy air clung to my skin. It carried something heavy, something vile. Even a shower didn't seem to scrub away those pungent particles. The days went by, and the scent worsened. It breached the living room's borders, wafting through the house. But 1 week after living in our new home, Dad solved the mystery. We moved the bulky mahogany cabinet away from the corner of the lounge, and he heroically fist-pumped the air. The thick, revolting air. The stench had been strengthening as we waddled the furniture away from the wall, and the reason for that became clear. When we looked down at the carpet, there lay a damp, mouldy patch at our feet. The source of the ghastly smell that had been violating our senses for 7 torturous days. My dad wasted no time in peeling up the carpet to see what it was hiding, to see what had been assaulting our noses. The last thing I expected was a wooden trapdoor built into ancient floorboards. Still, that discovery left unanswered questions. We knew that we weren't just smelling wet, rotten wood. Something had turned my stomach several times, and it wasn't the smell.
"Do you think the previous owners put it there?"
I asked in a nasally tone, pinching my nose to seal my nostrils. "Mr. and Mrs. Dowdy? Well, they were a little forgetful in their old age, I suppose," Dad shrugged, before bending down to inspect the circular iron handle. "But this is a Victorian house, Maeve. It's been refurbished quite a few times. I'd imagine Mr. and Mrs. Dowdy wouldn't have ever looked beneath the carpet."
"The two of them must have noticed this terrible smell during their 50 years here."
I scoffed, almost choking on a laugh as I inhaled the rotten air through my open mouth. Dad smiled. "Maeve, did you never smell Mr. and Mrs. Dowdy? They hadn't showered in a long time. I think they were nose blind." I snorted. "Joking aside, this smell must be a recent development. It certainly wasn't here when we looked around the property, was it?" my dad asked, curling his fingers around the trapdoor's handle. "I'm intrigued to see what's down there."
"Just don't fiddle with anything structural,"
I said, looking at the cabinet we'd shuffled to one side.
"I'm fairly certain that piece of furniture might have been holding the ceiling up."
The trapdoor did not creak, but screamed as it opened. A high-pitched shriek of relief at having been uncovered after heaven knows how many decades of neglect. I reflexively moved my hands to my ears, but quickly realised that the stench was worse than the deafening groan of the old iron hinges. I moved one hand back to my nose. "Oh, blimey!" my dad spluttered, pulling out his phone.
"At least put a peg over your nose," I said. "Who knows what you're inhaling?"
He turned on the torch, cast it into the hole, then uttered a meek hum of curiosity. I joined him and looked over the edge of the square-shaped opening. Below, there swam water so thick, so toxic, that it revealed only our disgusted reflections. However, for a moment, the opaque sludge bulged, as if something were threatening to break the tension of the surface. It might be a burst sewer pipe, Dad suggested.
We should probably call someone,
I said. Gary, he loudly replied, snapping his fingers. Yeah, he'll help. He's a pal. Oh, right. I'm gonna close this before we pass out. Dad heaved the weighty door over, removing the mysterious water from sight, but not smell. Strangely, however, I no longer cared about the awful aroma. In fact, I'd stopped pinching my nose. I was too busy contending with the painful shiver coursing through my body. Too busy fearing whatever I'd seen below the water. Or rather, whatever I'd almost seen. The clotted waste had revealed nothing below its sickening surface. I spent the rest of the evening in the kitchen, stayed there long after dinner, despite Dad's attempts to convince me to relax in the lounge with him. Come on, May, he shouted. It doesn't smell that bad in here. Well, it probably does, but I think my nerves have been obliterated at this point. I eventually summoned the courage to enter the living room. I'm going to bed. At 9:30? Dad asked. I've not seen you go to bed before midnight in years. I tried to ignore that damp patch of carpet, but the goose pimples on my nape were too present. I twisted, shooting an accusatory glare at the corner of the carpet, and my breathing steadied slightly. There was nothing to see but that foul-smelling stain. Gary's coming over first thing in the morning, Dad promised, noticing my haunted eyes. He'll have a proper look under there, and he won't leave until he's found some sort of solution. Okay? I spent the next few hours lying in my unlit bedroom and doom-scrolling on Reddit, hoping that a healthy dose of brain rot might quell that persistent fear beneath the sludgy surface of my mind. Did I really see something in the water? I didn't know whether I wanted an answer to that question. When Dad came up to bed, the house fell silent, and my dread amplified. There was nobody to keep an eye on the lounge's carpet. That was my first thought when the sound of rustling woke me at 5 in the morning, shortly before dawn. The sound of something shuffling against the carpet. Not large booming footsteps. It was the sound of something swimming through the bristles on the upstairs landing. I would have chalked it up to my father sleepwalking, as he was prone to doing that, but there were no creaking floorboards. It was a horribly quiet noise. I didn't want to find the source, but I was terrified of it finding me. I shuffled out of bed on unwilling legs and tentatively opened the door. Then my lips followed suit as I uttered a meek sound of terror. A slimy trail ran along the entire length of the landing. It stopped at the end of the hallway, curved, and returned to the stairs. Given the repellent smell, I knew it originated from that dreadful place below the carpet. Below our home. With quaking limbs, I tiptoed around the wet streaks, not wanting my bare feet to touch the unknown substance. And when I reached the top of the landing, I stopped. I was halted by something in the lobby, illuminated by the street lamp shining through the front door's glass pane. My eyes were drawn to the coat hooks along the wall, the dirty mat below them. There hung a long, navy trench coat, which draped down and rested neatly on a pair of leather walking boots. I knew, even from the top of the stairs, that the outfit was damp. The scent of mould carried up the steps, and there was the telltale sign of that wet trail leading from the staircase to the mat, then from the mat to the living room, to its point of origin. The sludgy carpet streaks told a petrifying story, one confirmed by a sudden sound from the lounge. A wooden door clunking closed. I clasped my mouth to silence the primal scream, striving to escape. Then I stumbled backwards. My heel pressed into one of the damp trails, and a second scream filled my throat. I thought of what might have caused that trail, tried not to think of it. Then I scurried back to my room and slammed the door behind me. I stood with my hands pressed against the wood, holding it shut for the next hour. Eyes twitching, but barely blinking. I sealed myself in my bedroom. A lifetime later, I felt the dawning sun pour through the gap between my curtains, but I only dared to take my hands away from the door when I heard my dad leave his bedroom. "Maeve?" he called from the hallway. "What is this?" With trembling hands, I opened the bedroom door and eyed the carpet below. The wet trails had dried, and my father was grimacing at the crusty lines of unidentifiable muck beneath his feet. "Is this from the..." He trailed off, retching slightly. "Oh, did you open the trapdoor, May?" I shook my head, before taking unsteady steps towards the end of the landing. My dad followed me downstairs, calling my name repeatedly, and I started to shake as I realised that all of the night's events had truly happened. "May, I'm talking to..." Dad paused, eyeing the new trench coat and boots in the downstairs hallway. "When did you put those there? They're drenched. They look a little big for you." "I think we need to go, Dad," I quivered. "No, you need to go," he said, looking at his watch. "You've got work. I've taken the day off to sort this mess. Gary's coming over, remember?" "I don't feel well," I gulped. "Please, Dad, let's go. Gary will understand." "What? Go where?" Dad asked as he eyed his phone. "Look, if you don't want to be here whilst he deals with the water, I understand. Go for a walk to get some fresh air, okay? Just make sure you call the shop to let them know that you won't make your shift." "It's not that, Dad," I insisted, quaking. "Those clothes aren't mine. I don't know how..." The bray of a car horn interrupted me. "Oh, that'll be Gary," he said, peeking through the window at the driveway. "As I said, May, if you feel unwell, then you should..." "Are you listening to me, Dad?" I interrupted, practically yelling. "Those clothes aren't mine. They appeared last night, along with the wet patches on the carpet. Something's wrong here. I heard something. Dad raised an eyebrow, surveying me with concern. "Those aren't your clothes. I don't understand, may I?" There came 3 knocks, and my father threw the door open to his middle-aged friend. The plumber showcased a belly, optimistically covered by a small t-shirt, and a receding hairline optimistically covered by a dishevelled comb-over. "Good to see you, Paul," Gary said, slapping my father on the back. "And little Maeve! You've shot up over the last year. Flippin' heck! Are you back from university then?" Just for the summer holidays," Dad said. "She's been working at Oxfam." "Oh aye? The little shop down the road?" his friend asked. "Dad," I whispered, "may I talk to you for a second?" Gary chortled. "Uh-oh, Paul. Sounds serious." "It'll be fine, May," Dad insisted, waving his hand at the coat and boots. "You know I sleepwalk. I probably took Mum's advice in the middle of the night. I don't know, decided to do a bit of spring cleaning. Those clothes are mine. Must be. I don't remember buying half of the things I own. You know that. Gary grew sombre. Oh, I'm sorry, mate. I didn't realise you two were talking about Maria. Dad shook his head. We weren't, Gary. It's just been a strange morning, that's all. A strange week, by the sounds of it, Gary said, heading into the living room. You weren't lying. This place stinks. I fearfully followed my dad and the plumber into the lounge, but I was relieved to find it looked the same as the evening before. I wanted to scream as my father lifted the trapdoor, and when Gary gasped, I imagined the worst. That's disgusting, the plumber said, placing a palm over his nose. Never in my 20 years of... Oh, is that sewage? No, it smells worse than sewage. Is it a plumbing issue? My dad asked. Well, the only way to find out would be for me to... Gary exhaled deeply. For me to go down there. And I'd rather not catch some horrendous disease. I'd like to calculate the size of this hole first. I need something to gauge the depth. You could use one of my old pool cues, Dad said. They're collecting dust in the downstairs cupboard. Well, I could, Gary nodded, smiling. But would you be okay with that? You'd have to chuck it in the rubbish afterwards. Dad returned with a pool cue moments later and handed it to his friend. Then the plumber, without any announcement, plunged the rod into the sludge. The unknown liquid, which was practically solid, released a squelch as the wooden tool sank into it. I was surprised when the makeshift measuring device thudded against something. It only seems to be about 1 metre deep, Gary said, sloshing the cue around in the toxic water. Now if I just... Oh, I think I've found something. As the pool cue wiggled in the waste, it rapped against something that clattered loudly, sending small vibrations through the floorboards. Dad wore a concerned expression on his face. There came a crumbling sound, followed by the rushing of water, the rushing of air. Dad grasped my arm as I flew forwards, but he wasn't fast enough to save his friend. The plumber had already been peering over the edge of the hole, eyeing the draining water with curiosity, before he tumbled into it. We expected the man's legs to lift uncomfortably into the air. Expected to see Gary performing some display of crumpled, cramped contortion in the hole which was, supposedly, only 1 metre deep. However, the man disappeared entirely into the waste. And then the rushing air ceased, as did the draining water. Dad and I peeked tentatively into an empty hole built from red bricks. A small rusty tap hung from the left-hand wall, but it did not seem to connect to any pipes. It had brought the unearthly water from some unknown realm. Clumpy water that had drained through a hole in the floor of the ditch after Gary knocked a brick loose. Where did he go? Dad asked. He couldn't have fallen through there. That's impossible. Gary! Then there came a rumble beyond the floor of the brick box. A rumble not from the earth quaking, but from something unthinkably mighty, making its way out of Earth's depths. Though it came from somewhere else. I know that now. Another brick fell away, followed by another, and another. Dad shone his phone torch into the opening with a shaking hand, and the pair of us screamed. In the blackness below the hole's disintegrating brick floor, we saw a figure crawling up a dirt tunnel, moving with insect-like agility in spite of its humongous presence. The torch revealed a rotten hand and the sleeve of a navy trench coat. We didn't wait to see its face. I screamed, and my dad yanked me backwards, pulled me away from the hole and out of the living room. I noticed that the coat and boots were no longer in the entryway, no longer marking the entity's domain. Whilst Dad unlatched the front door, my eyes remained glued to the living room. And from the opening in the floorboards, I saw not a hand, but a long skeletal leg. Its decaying flesh flapped in the breeze gushing up from the ditch. A violent gust stemming from some horrible underworld that was surely the being's home. And on the end of its crooked, fleshy stump was a large leather walking boot that quickly slammed to the carpet. It was quickly joined by the other. Something was lifting itself out by its feet, reeling its torso upwards like a fishing line. But Dad tore my frozen form out of the front door before I had a chance to see the thing's full form. That was 1 week ago. We haven't returned to our home, and we don't plan on doing so. We called the police, but they found nothing when they inspected the property. Obviously, Dad omitted the supernatural details of our tale, as he knew they wouldn't believe him, knew it would only make him seem culpable for Gary's disappearance. Wherever my dad's friend has gone, I pray that he has met some sort of end. To live with the thing in the long coat and the walking boots, that's a nightmare I wouldn't wish on anyone.